We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 104b. On the previous summit, the Mishnah said that the Kohanim who are dealing with the burning of the Parim HaNisrafim and the Sirim HaNisrafim, these are the bulls that are burned, the he-goats that are burned, these are inner carbon chatos which are entirely burned. So those Kohanim who are dealing with the burning, their clothing become impure. And the Mishnah now continues and says, Hayu sovlin oso b'mutos, they carry them with poles, they're carrying out these Parim HaNisrafim and the Sirim HaNisrafim on these poles. So Yatsu Harishonim Chutz L'chomas HaAzara, when the first Kohanim at the front of the pole, when they leave the walls of the Azara, v'achronim lo yatsu, but the Kohanim in the back, they have not yet left the Chomas Azara. They have not yet left the courtyard. In such a situation, harishonim mitamim begadim. So the first Kohanim, so their begadim will be tamei, their clothing will be impure because they've left the Azara. V'achronim einon mitamim begadim ad sheyatsu. But the ones who are in the back, their begadim will not be tamei until they leave the Azara. Yatsu elu ve'elu mitamim begadim, when they all leave, so then again, when they leave the Azara, their begadim, their clothing will be tamei. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Einon mitamin at sheyutzas ha'or beruban. The tumah does not happen until the fire takes hold of the majority of what is being burned. And the Mishnah says, Nita chabasar, if the meat was totally scorched to the point where there's no moisture, and then somebody goes ahead and burns that, Ein hasoref mitame begadim. The one who burns that, his clothing are not going to be tamei. And Rashi explains, Nita chabasar, if the meat is scorched, the gamra sreifasan, meaning again, the burning is really finished. So then, ein ha-mesayeh shuv bohen mitame begadim. Anyone who now assists at this point forward, his begadim are not going to be tamei. Aval mekame hachi, but before that, kol ha-mesayin b'shas sreifa, anyone who assists during the time of the burning mitamin begadim, again, their garments will be burned. And the Gemara says, my bira, what is the bira that is referred to in the Mishnah? Again, the Mishnah said that if the Parim HaNisrafim and Sirim HaNisrafim become disqualified, so then they are burned just as disqualified karbanos, then they're burned at the Beis HaBira, and the Gemara is asking, what is that? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabba bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Mokom yesh b'har habayis, there was a place on the Temple Mount, Ubira Shemo, and it was called Bira, that's what we're referring to. V'reish Lakish, Amar Reish Lakish says, Kol habayis kulo, the entire house, Korei Bira, it was all called Bira. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Habira asher hachinosi, it says Habira asher hachinosi, that is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. Rav Nachman said, that Rabba bar Avua said, Shlosha Beis Hadashan in Hain, there are 3 Beis Hadashan in 3 areas of the ashes. Beis Hadashan Gadol Haya Be'azara, there was a large one in the Azara. Shasham Sarfim Psulei Kodshei Kodashim, that's where they would burn disqualified Kodshei Kodshim. Ve'imurei Kodshim Kalim, and they would burn the sacrificial portions of Kodshim Kalim. Uparim HaNisrafin, Usirim HaNisrafin, and the bulls that are burned, and the he-goats that are burned, She'ira B'hen Psul, Kodem Zrika, if there was some kind of disqualification before the throwing of the blood. And the Gemara continues, Ubeis Hadesh and Achrahaya, there was another area of ashes, Bahar Habayis and Harabayis, Shasham Sorfin, Parim HaNisrafim, Usirim HaNisrafim, She'ira B'hen Psul, Achar Zrika, that's where they burned the Parim HaNisrafim and Sirim HaNisrafim, if there was a disqualification after the throwing of the blood, Uchemitzvasan, and if they were burning it according to the proper procedure, meaning there was no disqualification, then Chutz L'Shalosh Machanos, then it was burned outside of the 3 camps, meaning to say, outside of Yerushalayim when there was a Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question, Lina, if it's left overnight, Mahu Shatoel Beparim HaNisrafim Uvesirim HaNisrafim, would that be a disqualification by the Parim HaNisrafim and the Seirim HaNisrafim, again by the bulls that are burned and the he-goats that are burned, which are the inner chatos? Mi'amrinon ki mahanya lina bebasar debarachila, maybe we say that lina is only effective by meat which is going to be eaten. Avalhani delav b'nei achila ninhulo, but over here, where the korbanos are not going to be eaten, the Parim HaNisrafim, Sirim HaNisrafim are burned, so maybe there's no concept of lina. Odil maloshna, or maybe there's no difference, and lina would in fact be a disqualification. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Hamilsi boileli Abaya, this issue was a question to Abayu, Peshatanu lei meho, and he answered it from the following Braisa. It says, Veshavin all agree, Shimchishev ba'achilas parim uvisreifasan, that if a person has intention, this is talking about having intention of pigul, by the achilas parim uvisreifasan, by the eating of the bulls, and by their burning, shalawasa klum, that he's done nothing. And so the Gemara says, my lav is it not? Midamach shavalo pasla, we see that intention is not a disqualification. disqualification by the parim hanisrafim. So lino nami lo pasla, so being left overnight also is not a disqualification. But the Gemara says, Vidilma, maybe machshava hu de lo pasla, maybe machshava is not a disqualification. Avalina pasla, maybe being left overnight is a disqualification, meaning to say maybe they are different. And Rashi explains Vishavin, and they agree, She'im Chishev, that's Vishavin, Rabbi Shimon v'Chachamim. It means to say that Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim, they agree. She'nechliku beperik beishamai, because they do argue earlier, in Pigol Noheg bechatos hapnimios, whether Pigol applies by the inner chatos, She'im Chishev lechol mi besar haparim l'machar, meaning if a person has intention to eat from the meat of the parim tomorrow, or he has intention during the time of the slaughtering, he has intention to burn them outside of the three camps, l'mocher tomorrow, lo asaklum, that's nothing, to machsheves achila bedover shedarko lechol be'inan, because it has to be an intention of eating something that's supposed to be eaten. V'hani lav darkon lechol, and this is not the way to be eaten. V'gabe sreifanami, by burning also, afagav dechi orcha, even though that is what's supposed to be done, but choshev achilas mizbeach o achilas adam, even though that's considered to be again the normal way, but achilas mizbeach o achilas adam be'inan lefagel, it needs to be the consumption by the mizbeach or a person for pigul. Umandam or pigul noeg bepnimiyim, and the one who says that there is pigul by these inner chatos, that's kagon im chishev al haktaras emurim. That's if the person was thinking about the burning of the sacrificial portions, lakrivo lamacher, that should be for tomorrow. And Rashi continues, again, the Gemara said from the fact that machshava is not a disqualification, maybe lino nami lo pasla b'vesaro, maybe if the meat is left overnight, that's also not a disqualification. Kasal kadaiduch de lina pasla, machsheves lina nami pasla. Right now we think that if being left overnight is a disqualification, so then the machsheves lina, the intention to be left overnight, is also a disqualification. That's why they are equating them. And then the Gemara said maybe not, maybe machshava is not a disqualification, but actually being left overnight is. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Mishnah in Meseches Me'ilah, Parim hanisrafim, Usirim hanisrafim, with regards to the Parim hanisrafim and Sirim hanisrafim, Moalin bohen mishahuktashu, there's Me'ilah from the moment that they are consecrated, Nishchetu, and from when they are slaughtered, Huchshru li pasel b'tvul yom, uva mechusar kippurim, uvalina, so then they're able to become disqualified through a tvul yom or mechusar kippurim, meaning through tumah, and also through lina, through being left overnight. And the Gemara says, my lav, is it not linas basar? Exactly our question. Being left overnight, the meat is being left overnight, and you see that there is a concept of lina when the meat is left overnight by the parim hanisrafim and the sirim hanisrafim, even though that meat is burned. And the Gemara says, lo, no, lina say murin. That's not talking about the meat being left overnight. It's talking about the sacrificial portions which are going to be burned on the mizbeach. That being left overnight, there certainly is lina. But the Gemara continues, v'amidiktani seifa, but from the fact that it says at the end of that Mishnah, it says kulon moalin behen beveis hadeshen at shayuta chabasar, that there's me'ilah at the base hadeshen, at the place where it's burned, the place of the ashes, again until the meat is totally scorched. Now that's clearly talking about basar. So me the seifa basar, from the fact that the end of the Mishnah is discussing basar, reishanami basar. So shouldn't we assume the beginning of the Mishnah, when it talks about lina, it's also talking about basar? The Gemara says me the area, it's not necessarily the case. Seifa basar reisha emur, and it could be the end is talking about basar, but the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about emurin. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof, the Tani Levi, because Levi taught, She'ira b'hen psul, if there's some kind of disqualification, be it siyasan, when they are leaving to be burned. My lav, is it not the lina? We're talking about the disqualification of being left overnight. That's the psul that's being referred to. And the Gemara says, lo, no, psul tumma, it could be the disqualification of tumma, upsul yitzia, or the disqualification of leaving the proper area before the zrika. As Rashi explains, upsul yitzia kagon sheyatzu lifnei zrikas damim, let's say they went out before the throwing of the blood. Shadayin lo higia zman and lotzes, it wasn't yet the time. Again, this is talking about the parim hanisrafim and the sirim hanisrafim. It wasn't yet the time for them to leave. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rebbe Lazar asks, Yitzia Mao Shatoel Beparim Hanisrafim Usirim Hanisrafim. Again, if by the Parim Hanisrafim and the Sirim Hanisrafim they leave the Azara before the Zrika, what we just mentioned, now Rebbe Lazar is asking, is that in fact a disqualification? As Rashi says, Yitzia Mao Shatoel Leposlon Im Yatsu Minhu Azara. Again, is it a disqualification if they leave the Azara Lifnei Zrikas Damim, before Zrikas Damim? After the Zrika, they are supposed to leave, because again, they're burned outside of the Machane. But what if they leave before the zrika, is that a disqualification? And the Gemara continues, "My kami boile." What exactly is the question over here? Rashi explains, "My kami boile, amai tifsel." Why should it be a disqualification? Hare sofan lotzes. It's supposed to leave at the end anyhow. And the Gemara continues, "Amar Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba." Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba says, "Aliba demand Amar adayin lo higia zmano lotzes." According to the one who says it still isn't the time that they're supposed to leave, me amrinan hani mili basar. Do we say that's just by meat? De'ein sofo lotzes chova, where it's not an obligation to leave. Aval hani de sofon lotzes chova, but here where it's an obligation that it goes out to be burned. Lo, maybe we don't say that. Odilmar, maybe hachinami here also. Lo higias mano lotzes. It's not yet the proper time for it to leave. And Rashi explains, Zamar Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba. Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Ki kami boy le aliba demand deposel besar kachim kalim. We're talking here according to the one who says that if you have meat of kachim kalim, sheyotza lefnei zrikas damim, let's say before the zrika it left the azara. Now when it comes to the meat of kachim kalim, it's allowed to leave the azara. It can be eaten in all of Yerushalayim. It doesn't have to leave the azara, but it's allowed to leave the azara. But let's say it left before zrikas damim, so we say over there's one mandomer that says that it's possible mishum da'dayin lo higiaz manu lotzes, because it wasn't yet the time to leave. It's too early, so it shouldn't be leaving. This is not the proper area right now. But parakol hatadir, this is earlier in parakol hatadir. So we're asking the question according to that. If you say that the besar kachim kalim before zrika, that is disqualified, so now we have a question here. Hachamai, here what would be the halacha? Mi amrinan hanimili bebesar kachim kalim dein sofan chova lotzes. Maybe that's only true by the meat of kachim kalim because it doesn't have to leave. Aval hani shesofan lotzes chova, but here where it has to leave, it's an obligation eventually to take it out. Lo mifsali b'yitziasan. Maybe we say it's not disqualified when it leaves. That's the question of the Gemara in terms of yitzia, again by parim hanisrafim and srim hanisrafim before zrikas damim. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here proof from what we just brought above, the Tani Levi, because Levi taught she'ira bo psul b'yitziaso, that there was some disqualification when it was leaving. So my lav psul yitzia, doesn't it mean that there's a psul of yitzia? That's actually how we interpreted it above, that there's a disqualification that it left before the zrikas damim. You see, there is a disqualification. The Gemara says, lo, no, psul tumma upsul lina. It might be referring to a disqualification of tumma. It might be referring to psul lina. In other words, the Gemara is saying you don't really know what exactly we're referring to. Whatever we suggest, we could say it's the other way. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rebbe Lazar asks, Parim hanisrafim usirim hanisrafim, by the Parim hanisrafim and sirim hanisrafim, let's say sheyatza rubo b'miut aver. What if the majority has left, but it's only a majority of the animal that has went out if you count a minority of a particular limb? As Rashi explains, sheyatza rubo umiut echon min ha'evarim, a minority of one of the limbs, mashlim l'ruba shal behema liyitziyasa. That completes that the majority of the animal has now left. And so again, the Gemara asks, in such a situation, Mahu, what's the halacha? As Rashi explains, Mahu, mihavi yitzi, is that considered leaving? L'tamei as hamisaskin bo'tzas ruban. We say when it leaves, the people who are bringing it out, they become tamei. So now the majority has left and they become tamei. O lo havi yitzi, or maybe that's not really considered to be leaving because it's only a majority through the minority of a limb. That's the question of the Gemara. Hach miyuta de'ever basar ruba shadin anlei. Do we say that minority of the limb that follows the majority of v'halo nafkale, and therefore that has not really left? Odilma basar ruba de behema shadinan. Maybe we just say we follow the majority of the animal. The majority of the animal has in fact left the area. And the Gemara says, Pshita, well that's obvious. The lo shavkinan ruba de behema. We're not going to abandon the majority of the animal. V'yazlinan basar ruba de ivarim, and follow the majority of the limbs. In that case, the way the case is described, the majority of the animal has left, so that's considered that it has left. That cannot be the question. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather sheyatza chetzio barov aver. The case is that 50% of it has left with the majority of the limb. So hai miyuta de aver. Then we have a question. This minority of the limb, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Hey Amud Aleph.